The courtyard of my uncle's house was alive with noise the evening I arrived. Laughter spilled through the open windows, and the warm scent of food clung to the air. Relatives moved about in clusters, their voices weaving a fabric of familiarity and tradition. To anyone else, it was just another family gathering, a chance to share stories, exchange pleasantries, and keep appearances intact. For me, it was a reminder of the quiet discontent simmering beneath the surface of my well-arranged life. My name is Arif, and I had become skilled at playing roles. At home, I was the dependable husband, the dutiful provider. Among relatives, I was the polite nephew, the respectful cousin. Yet, as I drifted through the chatter and handshakes that evening, I carried with me a sense of estrangement, as though I were standing apart from my own existence, looking in through a window. It was then that I noticed him. His name, I later learned, was Denial. He stood by the far wall, a glass of juice in his hand, his head slightly tilted as though weighing every word spoken to him. He wasn't a stranger, exactly, our families had met before, but there was something different about him that night. His eyes lingered a fraction too long when they met mine, and the curve of his smile seemed to contain a secret no one else could read. I tried to dismiss the pull I felt, yet my gaze kept returning. He was younger, his posture relaxed, his laughter unforced in a way that contrasted sharply with my own measured responses to small talk. Where I wore restraint like a well-pressed suit, he carried freedom on his shoulders as though it weighed nothing. Our first conversation was brief, almost casual. I approached him near the refreshments table, pretending to look for something to drink. "You don't seem very interested in all this noise," I remarked, keeping my tone light. He chuckled, his eyes flicking toward the crowded room. "It feels like the same stories on repeat. I prefer listening to someone new." There was a candor in his words that unsettled me. I asked simple questions, and he answered without hesitation, revealing glimpses of a mind that was curious, observant, and disarmingly open. The more we spoke, the more I felt the invisible tether pulling tighter between us. Still, beneath my curiosity lay hesitation. I was no stranger to desire, but this was different, intimate in a way that threatened the fragile balance of the life I maintained. Yet Denial seemed to sense my unease, and instead of stepping back, he leaned in. "Arif," he said softly, lowering his voice so no one else could hear. "You don't have to hide behind polite answers. Tell me something real." His directness pierced through me. I hesitated, then admitted more than I had intended, snippets of personal truths I rarely voiced, my dissatisfaction with routines, my hunger for something unspoken. His expression didn't harden or shift with judgment. Instead, it brightened as though he had been waiting to hear exactly that. The hours passed unnoticed. We found excuses to drift away from the crowd, standing in the shadowed corners where voices blurred into background noise. The others may have thought us simply chatting, but each word felt like an unraveling of the mask I had worn for so long. By the time the gathering began to thin, my thoughts were no longer on polite farewells or obligations. A reckless impulse grew inside me, fed by his lingering glances and the unspoken invitation in the way he stood closer each time. My heart pounded against the bars of caution, urging me toward a choice I hadn't planned to make. I leaned toward him as the night air cooled around us. "Would you come with me?" I asked, the words trembling between fear and longing. He met my eyes without hesitation. His nod was small, but it carried the weight of certainty. Moments later, we slipped out quietly, the sound of laughter fading behind us. My car door closed with a muted thud, sealing the decision neither of us could take back. As I started the engine, I felt the first crack of the life I thought I had built so carefully. The road ahead was dark, but it led somewhere new, somewhere neither of us could yet name. The city unfolded quietly as Denial and I drove through its dimly lit streets. Street lamps cast long shadows across the windshield, and every turn of the wheel seemed to carry us farther from the safe predictability of family gatherings and into something unknown. Denial sat beside me, Calm yet alert, his profile illuminated in fleeting moments by passing lights. Neither of us spoke much, but the silence wasn't heavy. It was charged, filled with anticipation neither of us could deny. When we reached the hotel, my pulse quickened. The building itself was unremarkable, tucked between shops that had already closed for the night, but to me it felt like a threshold. I parked the car and cut the engine, hesitating for the briefest moment. Guilt brushed against me, sharp as a knife, reminding me of the life I was betraying. Yet when I turned to denial, his gaze was steady, almost reassuring. "Are you sure?" I asked, my voice lower than a whisper. He smiled, the kind of smile that seemed to strip away every layer of doubt. "I've never been more certain." Inside, the lobby was quiet. I signed the register with a hand that trembled only slightly, my pen's strokes angled to disguise the nervousness I felt. Denial stood close enough for his sleeve to brush mine, a small contact that steadied me. The elevator ride to the room stretched longer than it should have, the hum of the motor mixing with the sound of my heartbeat. When the door finally clicked shut behind us, silence expanded in the room. A muted lamp cast soft light across the bedspread, the curtains drawn against the night. For a moment, neither of us moved. I felt the weight of choice pressing down on me, heavy with consequence, but also intoxicating in its freedom. Denial was the first to break the stillness. He stepped closer, his eyes searching mine as if asking for permission that words could not provide. I gave it with a nod, and then the space between us vanished. The first touch was tentative, exploratory, but it carried a charge that surged through me. His hand lingered against my cheek, his breath warm against my skin. In that moment, I felt stripped of all the roles I had been forced to play, no longer the careful nephew or the dutiful husband, but simply a man, vulnerable and seen. The night unfolded in waves, hesitation giving way to urgency, restraint dissolving into abandon. Each gesture, each whispered word drew us deeper into a space where the outside world could not intrude. His laughter was soft, unguarded, and it filled the room with a sense of intimacy I hadn't realized I craved. I responded with a hunger that surprised even me, as though years of silence had finally found their voice. Yet, beneath the passion ran a thread of awareness. I knew what this was: infidelity, a betrayal of vows I had once spoken with sincerity, but I also knew it was more than simple desire. Denial's presence awakened something long dormant in me, a need for authenticity, for connection without pretense. It was as if I had been sleepwalking through life, and now, with him, I was awake. When the rush of intensity ebbed, we lay side by side, the ceiling above us blurred by the dim glow of the lamp. Denial turned toward me, his expression softened, almost boyish in its openness. "Do you regret this?" he asked quietly. I considered his question, the weight of it settling in the space between us. I should have answered yes. I should have told him that this was a mistake, that it could never happen again. But the truth pressed against my throat, undeniable. "No," I said at last, "not with you." His hand found mine, and he squeezed it gently as though sealing a pact neither of us had spoken aloud. The room fell silent again, but it was no longer the silence of uncertainty. It was the silence of two people suspended between guilt and revelation, caught in the fragile stillness after a storm. Outside, the city moved on, unaware of the choices being made behind drawn curtains. But within those walls, I knew something irreversible had begun. As I drifted into uneasy sleep, I sensed that this night would not remain a secret buried in memory. Denial's presence was not fleeting. It had the gravity of something that would follow me long after dawn. Morning light slipped through the curtains, faint but insistent, scattering across the floorboards of the hotel room. I opened my eyes slowly, disoriented by the unfamiliar setting. For a brief moment, I imagined it was all a dream, but then I turned and saw Denial lying beside me. His face was peaceful, untroubled by the weight pressing on my chest. I watched him breathe, steady and calm, and wondered how someone so young could look so certain while I felt as though I were unraveling. The night had been real, more real, than anything I had allowed myself to feel in years. Yet, with the dawn came the truth. I had crossed a line that could not be erased. I slipped out of bed, quietly pacing toward the window. The city stirred below, its people moving through routines as if nothing had changed. But for me, everything had shifted. The reflection staring back at me in the glass was not the same man who had walked into that gathering the evening before. Behind me, Denial's voice cut through the silence. "You're thinking too much." I turned, caught by the softness of his smile. He sat up, stretching his confidence undimmed. "Last night wasn't a mistake, Arif. Don't try to make it one." His certainty unsettled me more than my own guilt. I wanted to believe him, to surrender to the simplicity of his conviction, but life was not that simple. I had a home, a partner, a reputation built on years of careful restraint. And yet here was this boy, this man, who had undone it all in a single night. We dressed in silence, the weight of unspoken words between us. When we finally stepped out of the hotel, the morning air was cool, almost cleansing, but it did little to ease the storm inside me. The drive back was quiet, though not uncomfortable. Denial leaned back in his seat, his gaze fixed out the window, as though he trusted that this was only the beginning. Before parting, he placed his hand on mine. "I'll find you again," he said, his tone certain, not pleading. Those words echoed in my head long after he walked away. In the days that followed, I tried to fold myself back into the life I knew. I greeted my partner with practiced warmth, performed my duties at work, and smiled at relatives as though nothing had shifted. But the act felt heavier now, like clothes that no longer fit. My mind returned again and again to Denial, his laugh, his touch, the way he had seen through me without effort. At night, when the house fell silent, I caught myself replaying moments from the hotel room, torn between shame and longing. I had thought it would be a single transgression, a chapter to close and bury. Instead, it lingered, demanding to be remembered. True to his word, Denial sought me out. He called, sent messages, found excuses to appear in places I hadn't expected. Each time, I felt the same jolt of conflict, the instinct to protect the life I had built clashing with the desire to step into the one he offered. He did not press or demand. He simply reminded me, with his presence, that the night we shared had meaning. I tried to resist, but each encounter drew me closer to admitting a truth I had long denied. What I felt with him was not merely lust. It was connection, raw and undeniable. And once you taste honesty, even in forbidden form, pretense becomes unbearable. One evening, as I sat alone, I realized the enormity of what had begun. Infidelity is often spoken of as betrayal, a selfish act of weakness. Perhaps that is what mine was. Yet, in the hollow spaces of my life, Denial's presence felt less like betrayal and more like awakening. I don't know what the future holds for us. I don't know if I will have the courage to abandon the roles I've spent a lifetime perfecting, or if I will remain trapped, torn between two worlds. But I do know this. That night at the hotel was not an end. It was a beginning, one that refuses to let me go. And as much as I fear the cost, part of me longs for Denial to keep searching, to keep finding me, until I can no longer pretend I don't want to be found.